Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I'm your host, Mike Corrado with Nikon. I've been with Nikon for 35 years and been taking pictures for over 40 years. And we have another interview lined up with an incredible commercial photographer. He's a sports photographer. He's been to the World Series. He's been to Super Bowls, Kentucky Derbies. He's been to it all. From Dallas, Texas, we have Andrew Hancock, Nikon ambassador, on the line. How you doing, Andrew?
Morning, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's so great to see you. I miss you. I will say that out loud and not fear anything. I am very in touch with my feelings. And you know, we would normally be connecting at horse races, you know, through June and things like that we would typically run into each other on, and of course meetings. But it's nice to see you. How you doing in Texas right now?
I'm doing good. You know, just kind of managing the heat. You know, it's been a little warm lately, so we've been you know, triple digits for a bit, but you know, we're making do, and just trying to get kids in the swing of things with the start of the school year and doing everything virtually at home and all that stuff. So you know, it's an adjustment, but we're just, you know, taking everything in stride as best we can. So
yeah, I know you told me like today is day one of your daughter going back to school, or close to day one, and man, it's so different than it's been. But during this time, I mean, you've probably been home for several months, not traveling. What have you been doing during the pandemic?
Still a lot of work. You know, a lot of it's going to be, you know, on the personal side of things, and just trying to find new ways to kind of challenge myself to keep me moving forward and evolving as a photographer, which I think is a constant process. Reading a lot of photo books, just trying to find other places to get, you know, inspiration and keep everything stimulated on the creative side of things. I've had some work, especially on the horse racing side of things. We've had some stuff down here in the Southwest that's been open and running that we've been able to do. Had a great project that I got to do with you guys, highlighting the multiple exposures and the overlays the other day. So that was a really big shot in the arm. That was a lot of fun to take on and tackle. But I had a little bit of stuff, and you know, kind of starting to get geared up for the fall on what exactly it's going to look like. You know, with sports coming back now, things are very different. You know, with you know, photographers not getting field access, and a lot of the exclusive stuff, the behind the scenes things, really kind of having gone away, you know, short term anyways. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see what, you know, the next year looks like. But, you know, I'm just doing the best to kind of keep my ducks in a row and kind of, you know, having things lined up and in order as best I can for my house. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like this has gone on so much longer than we ever expected to go on. And as we move forward, we will be changing things. And, you know, to your point about limited photography, it was one of just a couple to shoot the Mets home opener, and you're only allowed at a certain level down. You can't go down in the field. There are different tiers. We talked about this on his interview, Rod Marr, who is a Seattle Seahawks photographer, as you know, and Nikon ambassador, and he's rolling himself back into the NFL right now as a team photographer, and they have to pick tiers of what you can do. It's kind of crazy, but it's the new norm. Our good buddy Skip Dickstein, you know, photographed at Belmont as one of the lone photographers there. So access is limited, and we certainly understand that. Now, I can't wait to get to your pictures, because I know you and have known you for years. Your creative goes like well above most. I think a lot of photographers are great, and I'm not trying to, you know, smooth things over with you here or make you feel any better or make the head bigger. But the fact that you go beyond with the creative and you use things in the camera, and people are going to get to see that now with the pictures. But of course, I have to ask, do you hate me for asking you to cull down your portfolio or body of years of work? The body of years of work down to, you know, 10 pictures?
No, not entirely. You know, I think part of it was fun because, you know, I kind of went back and looked at, you know, what might not necessarily be the best image, but different things that were kind of like watershed moments in my career, you know, that were like really kind of pivotal moments for a variety of things, whether it's a change in trajectory or a change in my approach and how I was viewing the profession and the craft, and just different areas where I was able to kind of take that next step in my career. So, you know, for me, it was a lot of fun to actually go through some of those. So, but people that know me know I'm really self-critical, and I hate like 98%, 99% of everything I shoot. I just think is like, you know, terrible, but that's just, I'm very hard on myself. But like, I'll go through pictures after a game and I'll look through like the entire take, and I'll just like rip myself apart and be thankful that I've got good editors sometimes. But do all that because like I expect a certain level of excellence out of myself. And if I don't feel like I achieved that, then I'm really hard on it. But I'll go through and I'll pick out all the mistakes I made, but I'll also obsess over those to make sure I don't repeat those moving forward. So
I think that's a great lesson for everybody. And you and I have had the chance to work together on commercial shoots and, commercial sports shoots, and had some fun in different locations around Indiana and Texas. And certainly I've seen your work, I've seen your demeanor, and you are the ultimate professional. But take us back to that first time you picked up a camera. Where does your love of photography, or that passion of photography, come from? How did that kick in your life?
Like stories that other people have heard before. Like, it was whenever I was a kid. I had a small little Fisher Price camera that had little flashes that would pop, kind of one at a time on this little thing. But I was a little kid, and just, I'd go to the zoo and I would just like pound through rolls of film and really enjoyed it. But like, from a sports perspective, it was interesting. My mom was the photography newspaper and yearbook teacher at the high school I went to. And I think I was probably 7th or 8th grade. And a couple of her students, I think yearbook students, needed to get a picture of one of the high school golfers. And the golf course that he was playing at wasn't too far from the house. And so the students stopped by the house on their way there. And so I asked them if I could join. And I remember them taking pictures of this golfer, and like, I was just kind of watching them, and I was like, that's not how you take a picture of a golfer. And so like, it was on a practice round. And so like, I was like, can I borrow the camera for a minute? And they were like, yeah, sure. So I took the camera and went and laid down in the sand trap, and I didn't chip on over and all that stuff. And I was like, all right, here you go. I took like two exposures. Like, all right, I'm done. There you go. They ended up running it in the yearbook. And I was like, that was kind of cool. But I never took the craft seriously, and even through college, I enjoyed it. I knew it's what I was going to do. My degree's in written journalism. Like, I'm a storyteller at heart. It's just, I found that I was most efficient telling a story with a camera, and the creativity it afforded me is also just kind of where, I really, was inspired. And so while I certainly can write and enjoy writing, photography is my true love. And so it was once I got out and I was working at a newspaper that I kind of, threw myself in the deep end and said, all right, sink or swim, pour everything you have into this, learn everything, become as flawless as you can from a technical perspective, and just kind of know all the rules, break all the rules, and, saddle up and let's go.
That's awesome. Well, it certainly has paid off. I mean, guys tuning in, Andrew's work with Sports Illustrated, ESPN, top magazines, top teams, Major League Baseball, at the NFL, you name it. He's kind of been there. And again, I've enjoyed watching your career unfold, especially into the technical stuff, because, like you said about the pictures you selected, others have said the same thing. It's more about this sort of documentary of my life and my career in photography and more pivotal moments than the best shots I've ever made. Because I know the shots you made at the World Series with the Chicago Cubs finally winning after 17,000 decades. And,
right.
That guy that booted the foul ball that Alou misses, who was
Steve
like
Bartman.
just kind of decimated for life, kind of got him past that, right?
Yeah.
But we'll get into that now. So if you don't mind, let me share the screen.
Cool.
And if you could share all of the details of the great work that you're doing. And tell us the backstories. Please don't hold out any details. Let us know about what it takes to get into here. You're in a place that nobody really shoots from except those that do remote photography. And let's talk a little bit about that. But take it away with this first photo.
Absolutely. This image is taken at what I would consider one of the cathedrals of basketball. And that's at Assembly Hall in Bloomington, Indiana, home of Indiana University. And so I was during a game that I was shooting for Sports Illustrated against Ohio State. And I had been shooting at Assembly Hall for a number of years. And I always put up strobes shooting basketball. It's great to have a motor drive, but you can't replicate the color and the detail you get whenever you're able to shoot strobe. Is it a lot more work? Absolutely. Is it challenging?
Talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to go past the strobe part. Like,
Sure.
what does that mean? Like, to those tuning in, you set up strobes.
Yeah, no, I'm hanging strobes. I'm hanging flashes up in the catwalk. This started whenever I was actually working my first newspaper right out of college. And yeah, I moved from Texas to Indiana blind. I'd never been to Indiana in my life. I took the job blind over the phone. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And I was working for a tiny 6-day-a-week newspaper. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. And, I pretty much, taught myself a lot of things until I started assisting. And but I would just start getting equipment and putting it up and just start experimenting. I'd go over to my grandfather's house, and there were always 3 magazines he had a subscription to that were always on the coffee table, and I could just go and I would pour through those. And I consider them kind of like my holy trinity for print journalism. It was Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine, and National Geographic. So like my introduction into photography was through those 3 pinnacle publications. And so, I'd kind of digest everything. And then, so like, I was just, not knowing it, was just filing away those ideas in the back of my brain. And it wasn't until I actually started doing it that everything just kind of came rushing back to the front. And so working for this newspaper, the Herald Press in Huntington, Indiana, I started just saving as much money as I could and just, started off with, the cheapest flashes I could afford and putting those up in the arena. And then that grew to getting my first Magic Arms and mounting a camera, looking through the glass. And the fun thing with Indiana, it's basketball there is like football is in Texas. And you have these great gyms with so much character, and the crowd turnout's fantastic. And like, I was like, all right, this is what I'm meant to do. And then it was a pretty crazy change in trajectory once I went to the Eddie Adams workshop. And I was, out on my, I was 3 years out of school, and went there. And that's when I met Jimmy Colton, the photo editor from Sports Illustrated, and
Uncle Jimmy.
So
Uncle Jimmy's come up several times on the many
very
interviews
cool.
we've done for the
Very
Creators
cool.
Hour.
Right.
Uncle Jimmy, I love you. We have to say it again. I hope he tunes into these things. But
absolutely.
A great editor, but more important, a great person.
Right.
A great person to connect with, and a mentor, and certainly a very, very talented man. So anyway, but yeah, again, a shot like this to me just is so different. Now, again, I've seen overhead shots and remote shots, and what you're sacrificing, just so everybody knows out there, is when you do work with arena strobes, 1 frame at a time. Right,
that's right,
Andrew?
That's right. Yeah, and it's 1 frame every, if you've got some really fast speedotrons or something, you might get a frame every second and a half. But typically, like with these lights I was using, it was about 2 seconds on the recycle. So, you've really got to pick your moments. And so, to this day, people ask me, well, how many frames a second do you need? I'm like, need and want are 2 different things. Mm-hmm. The more the merrier, especially if you're, shooting available light and you're doing football or baseball, because you can find just that perfect frame in a sequence. But, oftentimes with action sports, and especially with basketball, my best frame is going to be my first frame, because that's my instinctual reaction. And that comes from having to shoot on strobes. And you really have to be kind of honed into what you're wanting to do. But, I quickly found my love not only for arena lighting and lighting in general, but remote cameras. And so for each game, I'd put up 6 remote cameras at a minimum, sometimes 12, even if it wasn't a big game, because it's what I did. That's what I was passionate about, and I wanted to have those other frames. It was important to me. And so each time I try to do something different. Like I love the overheads, you love off the post and through the glass, and, a floor remote. But then I'd always each time try to put up a couple I'd call wild card remotes, and trying to do something that I haven't done at a particular venue before. And I guess it was probably a couple weeks before I shot this one, and I was in Bloomington for a game, and I'd set up my strobes, and I had a really wide angle shot from the catwalk, and I was just kind of playing around with the way the shadows looked and the way the lighting looked whenever I was kind of going through my images after that particular game. And I kind of had this idea, and I was like, all right, so next time I get a chance to shoot here, I want to set up the strobes instead of having them angled back in from where I would normally put them, which looks real ideal for like the glass remote, looking through the backboard, that sort of thing. I was like, it's going to compromise a couple of those looks. But I was like, I want to go just kind of bookend it and kind of go from each side to where I can cast shadows right into the middle of the lane. And so that's
Yeah,
where I
then,
had the idea for this picture. So.
and you took it exactly what I was going to ask you. How did you know, like, that this was kind of like something that could happen, and you got it from the other remotes? And again, we've seen other remotes, and you see the players in the shots and things like that. And that's why I thought this was so creative, that there's no human in this photo.
Right.
And
And the challenging thing is my editor at the time, Jen, she hits me up and she's like, so we're looking at this for a leading off. I'm like, fantastic. That's always something you want to try to gun for when you're working for SI is, one of those 3 coveted spots at the front of the magazine. And she's like, but we need to ID the shadows.
Journalism.
I was like, what do you mean we need? She's like, yeah, we need to ID the shadows. Can you ID the shadows? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because whenever I set up a cluster of remotes, everything is synced and lagged to where they all go off at the exact same time off the same burst of strobes. So I'll have 4 or 5 cameras all mounted looking at the hoop. So if you're blocked from a certain position, this is important whenever you're talking like playoffs, championships, things like that. Oftentimes you can get blocked by a ref or a player. So you want to have some sort of angle to play because you do not want to come back empty-handed. And so that's another reason for all the work. And so I was able to go through, and it's also why it's important to always have your timestamps on all your cameras if you're working a multi-camera setup to all be set on the exact same time. So I was able to go through, pop everything into Photo Mechanic, adjust it by capture time, go through, and then look at all the other angles of this moment. And I was able to identify all 6 shadows, and then they never use the names in the caption.
That's a great point, though, to synchronize the cameras.
Right.
And this is my universal symbol for triggering the camera. So it's all being fired with one simple trigger on yours, your end. Amazing. Let's keep going, because I could talk about that image for a while.
Sure.
But again, this is another unique perspective to the home of the 12th man, Seattle Seahawks. Talk about this.
No, not Seattle Seahawks. This is Texas A&M, which is the original
Texas
home
A&M.
of the 12th man.
Wait a minute.
So you can talk with Rod Marr about that. A&M has that trademarked. So.
Oh, listen, I'll leave that between Seattle and Texas. And I thought you were covering like a game. Now I see the colors of the fans more on me. I get it.
It's all good.
Talk about this. This is a big part of your career, too.
Absolutely. So I went to school at A&M, but whenever I moved up to Indiana, I didn't go back, in part because I was working at a tiny paper, and I was just trying to, I was working 7 days a week, just trying to grind things out in Indiana. And on top of that, I didn't have the money to go back all the time. So I was trying to build up gear and make my living up in Indiana. And then once I started getting in and working for Sports Illustrated, this was football season 2010. And A&M started pulling off some really, really big wins. And, you always kind of have the old saying of, I wish I knew now what I didn't know then type thing. And, hindsight being what it is. And so having been away from A&M for so long and now equipped with the knowledge and the technical expertise I had, it's always like, all right, whenever I get the chance to go back somewhere, taking the talent I have now, these are the pictures I'd be able to make that I just never bothered to look for whenever I was a student there. And so I always kind of keep that in mind. And so watching A&M start to pick off a bunch of ranked opponents, and they were starting to climb in the polls. Nebraska was coming to town. I think both teams were ranked top 10, top 15. I knew it was going to be a big game. One of my friends talked me into going. And so I'm thinking about like making pictures. And so I hit up Claire, our college football editor at Sports Illustrated. I said, hey, Claire, I said, who's assigned to this game? Because even though I would cover things coast to coast for the magazine, you still have kind of territories. And that was a little bit outside of my territory. And she's like, actually, nothing. We're just focusing on NFL this week. And she said, if you want to go, it's on you. But if you get something good, you can send it in for leading off. And this was a tough one for my wife and I, because I looked at flights, and it was going to be $500 for a flight. And frankly, we didn't have the money for it at that time. Like, it was going to be a stretch, and it could potentially put us in a bind. And I wrestled with the decision for a few days, and we talked about it. And we were about to go to bed one night, and I looked over, I said, Maria, I said, I need to go. She said, I trust you. Go. And I knew that this was a picture that I wanted to make. A&M is always known for having the largest student section in college football. They set, I think, the Guinness World Record for it at this game at 31,500 students, give or take. And we've always twirled the 12th man towels, and I knew it was going to be a night game. And so people don't realize that the maroon backing that was there on the behind the lettering at the time is actually kind of a semi-gloss, so it'll pick up reflections of the lights on the other side. So whenever I got to the stadium, I actually walked the field around 4 times, and I was looking to find the angles where I could get that composition without having the lights reflecting through the lettering, and then just sat and kind of waited for my shot and made that the start of the game. I remember the score was 9-6. It was a field goal game. And one of my buddies that was working for another newspaper, and he and I worked at the student paper at A&M together. I remember him walking by at halftime, and he's just beside himself because it wasn't that pretty of a game to shoot. And he's just like, I've got absolutely nothing. I've got to send stuff in. He's like, I've got absolutely nothing. And I looked over at my assistant, and I was just like, oh my God, because this was one of the first frames I made that night. And we were just playing with house money at that point. And I was just making frame after frame after frame. And, sometimes with sports, things go your way. Sometimes, a pivotal moment, the player can turn away from you and you've got no shot. Like for me, if it's, fingertip catch and I can't see anybody's face, it's no shot. It doesn't make my select. So, sometimes that's just how sports goes. But this was just one of those games where everything came together. And the big thing for me, while this holds a big place in my heart, is because this was the first time I really bet on myself. And I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to make this $500 investment and into myself and then into making a picture. Ended up being regarded as one of the top pictures that Sports Illustrated published that year. I got the image sent in the middle of the night, and I was about to go back to the airport about 6:45 in the morning to fly back to Indiana. And I got an email from Uncle Jimmy. And he said, before you head back, he said, we need the raw file for this image. And by the time I landed, he's like, that's a leading off. So, and it was,
and that's a huge emotional lift for you. I mean,
absolutely.
And it's more than 500 because you're paying for your flight, you're paying for food. Did you stay overnight?
I stayed at a friend's place. Yeah. I just sleep on a couch.
You look to cut it back as much as you can, but for it to pay off, I mean, it's a tough risk if you don't have the money, but when again, you push yourself, it's a great lesson to everybody because I know a lot of photographers that have to do that, especially these days. You self-assign, and then, you kind of work on spec. You create these photos, and you hope that somebody picks them up. And just to go back for everybody, especially maybe a younger audience that never opened to Sports Illustrated, the leading off with the first 3 pages, they were double truck spreads. That means the picture would spread across the 2 pages, paid handsomely in the day. And you either wanted the cover or you wanted leading off, right?
Absolutely. And that's what everybody was gunning for. I mean, it was the most prized real estate in sports photography, bar none.
And it's not easy because you're also challenged by maybe 60, 70 to 100 other photographers, especially the bigger events where you're going after that same page space. So, you're not alone, although you did know you were the only one at this game, which was great. That's a great story. And I'm glad it means so much to you. You and I, we knew each other when you made this shot. We talked about this a little bit, but it is a football player that at the time had a huge name and then kind of floundered a bit in the NFL.
Right.
But what's going on here, and how did you make this? This is obviously created. This is not just an action moment at a game.
Right. So this is Heisman winner Johnny Manziel, and the funny thing is that last picture kind of leads into this picture, not because the Texas A&M connection, which is kind of part of it. But after I made the picture of the home of the 12th man, I kind of got the golden key with the athletic department. I still had some connections there, but now after I made that picture, pretty much anytime I wanted to come back, I could come back, and they would give me access to whatever I wanted for the most part. And so then you fast forward to 2012. I was there when Johnny made his first game, shot that one when A&M played Florida. And the season goes on, ends up winning the Heisman. It had been decades since A&M had a Heisman Trophy winner, a lot of buzz around the team. Wins the Heisman, and then going into next season, and I'm always trying to think about ideas. And there's so much in photography that's been done before, but the challenge is trying to put your own unique spin on something, whether it's a technique, a look, a creative process. I'm all about trying to find your own voice. And pioneers in doing things that hadn't been done before. I mean, we're talking Zimmerman, Neil Leifer, Heinz Klutmeyer, Frakes. I mean, like these guys that I grew up, idolizing and was fortunate to learn under with Sports Illustrated. And, they always challenge you to make a unique picture, make something that's different. And, pictures of athletes on glass or plexiglass have been done for decades. But I was thinking is I've always wanted to do a plexiglass shoot. But I got to thinking, I was like, I've never seen, I scoured everything I could. I've never seen the Heisman from below. And so I called up some people I knew at A&M, and I said, I need Johnny for a shoot. And this was right after I had left employment. I was university photographer at Purdue. I'd been there for about 5 years, in addition to while I was doing all my work for Sports Illustrated. And I was like, all right, it's time I go out on my own, because that was holding me back from what I felt like was growing into what I needed to be. And so this was my first shoot after going freelance. And this was, again, another idea that I had, and self-funded. But then, they threw in a couple other players and said, no, my catch was, I said, I need Johnny, and I'll let you use the photos for what you need, but I need complete creative control, and I need to retain ownership of all the content. And they said, not only are we going to give you that, we're going to pay you to shoot, and we're going to throw in Mike Evans and Jake Matthews. And I said, done. We can make this work. But I still went into my own pocket. It was certainly at the time a net loss, because, a 5 foot by 8 foot piece of plexiglass, 1.5 inches thick, is expensive when you're custom ordering that. And I brought in assistants with me from Indiana, had one in from Boston, and then some Texas-based ones. And we had to rent 2 6-foot towers of construction scaffolding, and then fly that across and set it down on top of that, and then build a box set underneath. And so I could shoot Johnny doing the Heisman from underneath. The tricky thing is, it would be bad for business if you injured the reigning Heisman Trophy winner on a photo shoot. So certainly you'd want to avoid that. And so I was actually fortunate enough through the equipment guys at A&M to get a pair of unused game-worn game cleats for Johnny from his Heisman year. And so they got shipped to me from Portland, and so I had them. So I actually took a couple of plexiglass awards from a photo contest, and so I practiced just scraping the cleats up against them, because when you have cleats on plexiglass, it can kind of be like you're on ice. And the last thing I would do is him fall, get injured. Worse yet, something happens to the plexiglass, and then you've got these shards of sharp plexiglass coming down on top of me, along with the Heisman winner. That would just be bad. So we were able to modify the bottom of the cleats and try to find the right substance that would not mess up the plexiglass, but also allow him to have traction to be able to hit the poses we need. And so we did this over the course of 20 minutes, along with about 5 or 6 other shoots, and ended up landing 2 magazine covers out of it. I had Johnny's first Sports Illustrated cover, which I think was my 3rd or 4th SI cover at the time, and then that ended up being the cover of Time magazine. And it was also, should be noted, run as a full page on the front of the sports section of the New York Times, 6 columns across, top to bottom, which was really cool to see too. So all from that shoot, and just kind of betting on myself again, and really trying to start to push myself from a creative standpoint. And that's kind of where all this started to come together.
Yeah. Again, those of you tuning in, this is what I mean when I say, Andrew sort of taking things that have been done before and kind of pushing the envelope, and, to come up with the idea and then have it land on several covers in the New York Times and, SI. I mean, that's kind of monumental. I mean, that's what you push for, because let's not forget that you also have a family and you have to support, and,
right.
You pay bills just like everybody else. So the paycheck and having them pay you is critically important to this.
Right.
But then to get the additional money from the usage on covers and things like that is even better.
Absolutely.
And it's an amazing thing. And, I always wonder the connection and relationship that you have with athletes. And certainly, I mean, Johnny Manziel was a very talented, he was Mr. Football, right?
Right.
And then, unfortunately, the transition into the NFL didn't work out as well as possible. But a picture like this shows greatness, and your greatness as well in the way of technique. But he's a human, right? I mean,
right. The crazy thing is
when you meet these guys.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is everybody's like, well, how's he to work with? That's like, he was great to work with. He was very kind, very respectful, did anything I asked him to do. But the thing is, we didn't know when we were shooting him until after we were already in town. I had sent everything in, and so finally he committed to the time, or to a day, and I was like, all right, you just let me know what time and I'll do it. And he's like, well, he said this day, so you tell him whatever time and he's going to be there. But we had the entire crew in town not knowing when we were shooting him. And then we got in, made everything happen. I made sure that, you know, the stuff I was going to be doing for the 12th Man Foundation at A&M, they were going to get what they needed. And I was obviously shooting for, you know, myself because I had these ideas, but I'm always trying to think the long game. So I'm already thinking about how I can present these to SI. And so at the time, like each year, at least once a year, I'd make a trip into the office in New York and just kind of check in with the editors, show them my face, show them some updated work. And that's whenever I kind of showed them these pictures, and I showed, you know, the college football editor, and she looked at him. She's like, "Oh," she's like, "When did you shoot this?" And I said, "About 6 weeks ago." She's like, "You have the copyright to these?" I said, "I do." And then about that time, she calls Brad Smith in. Brad looks at it, and he's like, "You have the rights to these?" I said, "I do." He's like, "We need to see the raw of those." So I'm like, "All right, cool." So, and then off we go.
The way you responded sounded just like Brad Smith. And to shout out to Brad, Brad's another ridiculously talented editor from Sports Illustrated magazine, been in the photo world for a while. So hello, Brad. But yeah, really, I mean, that's amazing. And again, to be inspired by other shots similar, like you mentioned the names, Klutmeyer and Frakes and, you know, Neil Leifer. I mean, you're talking about some of the best sports photographers, you know, in the industry,
Absolutely.
you know, through the years. And, you know, to take a piece of that along with you as inspiration is great. Right. We've worked with you on many assignments before. I know similar to this in the way of the commercial approach to shooting sports, and certainly love the work you do. This starts to get really creative too. How did you do this? How did you light it? How did you shoot it? Because people are going to want to know.
Yeah, and the fun thing about this is you kind of talk about, you know, different, you know, stepping stones. So whenever I was in College Station doing the pictures with Manziel, I scheduled a lunch with the director of marketing for the university, and I believe he was one of the vice presidents at the time. And so we had lunch, and so I showed him the pictures, and he looks at these. He's like, "Yeah, it's about time you come home and start doing some work for us." And so that fall started doing portrait work for all of A&M athletics. And so that kind of leads into this, which I think was a couple years after starting to do that. And this is, and it's essentially a rear curtain sync, just drawn out and just trying to apply it creatively to where I'm turning on a constant light at a certain time in the motion. The tough thing with our player here, Speedy Noyle, is sometimes you have athletes that you know just need to be pushed a little bit. And he showed up, I mean, wildly talented and heralded player out of high school, a lot of potential, you know, a lot of just incredible athleticism. And he shows up and he's standing in front of the camera and he's just really not disinterested. He's just kind of upset that he's got to be there. And I take a couple pictures knowing that, and this is before we even get to this fun stuff, and take a couple pictures. I had a really nice aggressive lighting setup, and I called him over the camera. I said, "Look," and I turned it around. I said, "It's like this." And he looked at me. He's like, and there was some colorful words exchanged, but I said, "It's like that." And he's like, "It's like that." And I said, "It is." He's like, "I got you, big homie." Turned around there and flipped on the switch, and it was just showtime. He knew what things were going to look like, and I was able to push his button, and he just switched it on. And for those that know me, know I'm also a bit of a fitness addict myself. And one reason why I try to stay in great shape, and I played soccer all the way through college, it's nice to be able to move athletically and be able to coach an athlete in a situation like this, because these guys are visual learners. It's one thing if I tried to explain to them, like, I need right foot here, left foot here, blah, 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 need you running this manner. It's one thing when you try to verbalize it. But if you can go out there and pick up the football and actually run and show them what you need them to do. And I went out there and showed him, he's like, "Oh, I got you, big homie." And then he could just replicate it time after time after time. And then, you know, you just get to where you're playing with house money, and it's just, you know, stupid fun. And that's what this was. We had all the lights turned off on the indoor practice field, and I had an assistant that was training a focused hot light on him, and we knew kind of the moment when we needed to open the shutter, and then everything finishes off with a flash at the end. And there's a lot of people, you know, something I've always taken pride in is trying to capture the magic of all this in camera. You know, certainly you can do some really incredible things with Photoshop. That's just not my bag. You know, I like the challenge of trying to create something in camera, because for me, that's magical. I came up, whenever I first started, I was shooting film. And so, you know, to, you know, mention what's been mentioned a million times about the magic of the first time you see a print develop in a tray, you know, for me, it was doing multiple exposures in camera and, you know, doing things that I thought were challenging and creative. That's what really fueled me and pushed me, because I'd spend, countless hours in the darkroom, to where I'd be in there in college until 3-4 o'clock in the morning, just experimenting and playing around, but also playing around with things in camera and trying to do things that were going to really just kind of, challenge me, but also energize me. And, doing this types of stuff does, because especially when it's something that other people have to use Photoshop to do, for me, it's fun to be able to do it in camera. I'm like, no, this isn't a photo illustration. That's a photograph. So.
And then we'll show some of those multiple exposures that you've done in camera a little bit later. But real quick, collegiate level or professional level, where do you find more passion and excitement? Where would you rather be, on a professional field or a college field? I always felt like the energy of a college campus is like second to none.
Right.
And
Absolutely, until you start talking like playoffs. I mean, like baseball playoffs, something like that. That's when everything's get to go next level. Or a Triple Crown. I mean, that stuff is like, there's certain events that are just completely unique to themselves. But if I'm covering a garden variety event, I mean, college is just, everything seems a little more pure. But like whenever you're doing things more intimately, like behind the scenes or with portrait work, I'm finding it's the younger the athletes, they're more into it. And so that process becomes a lot more fun, because they've all come up in the age of social media and knowing the value of a photograph to, their image. And so those guys are a lot more giving of their time often, and a lot more energized, where you have, some of the older athletes that they're just, Instagram and Twitter wasn't very active when they were coming up and they were through college. So it's not as big of a priority for them. So
speaking of Triple Crowns and
right.
the Kentucky Derby, and
sure.
Here we go. Horse racing. I love photographing horses. And I know you've been to a billion of these types of events. Where are we here? What's going on? Why'd you choose this image in the selections?
All right, this is Churchill Downs, Kentucky Derby 141, when American Pharoah won the first leg of the Triple Crown, which he ended up winning as well in the first Triple Crown in 38 years. There hadn't been a Triple Crown winner since I'd been born, so for me, this was really cool. But I started off my career with Sports Illustrated assisting Bill Frakes. And whenever I moved to Indiana and I was working at my first paper, every year the photographer would apply for season credentials with the Colts. And so us being a small, tiny paper and having never covered them before, they would always say, no, you're turned down for full season credentials, but if you're interested in applying on a game-by-game basis, we'll consider you. But he never did. So I get there and I immediately apply for season credentials, get turned down, and get told the same thing. And so I applied for every single game, and then they let me into one. And at that game against the Jaguars, I look over and there's this group of photographers huddled up, and in the middle of them all mixing it up is Bill Frakes. And so kind of knowing, what he's done in the industry and his position with Sports Illustrated, and especially being aware of what he's done with remote cameras, which I was highly interested in, and with horse racing, I was like, I need to talk to this man, because I've been consuming his photography along with all the other greats since I was in high school. And went over, finally got the courage, talked with him, and he asked me what I was doing in May, and I said, this is the fall. I was like, whatever you need me to do. He's like, good. He's like, come to the Derby with me in May. And so I did. And so I kind of cut my teeth in the dirt, in the mud, working under extreme pressure, learning on the fly, a lot of things that I had no idea of learning, and just kind of took it and run with it, and really got hooked. Found that I felt like I responded really well to pressure, to criticism, but also, he knew how to motivate me and push my buttons to get me to move to the next level. And so this was, I guess, the first Derby I did on my own. And so I decided, I was like, I want to step out on my side on my own. I want to run a crew. So Derby 141, I approached a teammate of mine from the Eddie Adams workshop, and Bill was our team editor, our team leader, but Jeffrey Ferticella, who was photo editor for the New York Times, and he took over Brad's position at the New York Times when Brad left for Sports Illustrated. And so Jeff was working alongside Becky there. And I hit Jeff up and was like, so what are y'all doing for the Derby? And he's like, you want to do the Derby for us? And I said, I would love to do the Derby for you. And so I got to put together my own crew. But having done, horse racing photography and doing quarter horse racing as well down here in the Southwest, I was actually at Lone Star Park, I guess 2 years before this image was made, and noticed the lights they had that were near the finish line on the inside of the rail. And so if you're into remote photography, the fun thing is you're able to put a viewer in a place where they can't physically be. And it's just about finding a different angle that's going to be dramatic and captivating and make somebody, when they're turning the page, just stop. And so that's always kind of what you're going for. And so the year before this image, and I'm helping Bill out at the Derby, and I walk by, and this is, after they've put all the lights up at Churchill, because when I first started doing the Derby there were no lights. So now these lights are up, and they'd been up a couple of years, but after having seen what I saw at Lone Star and mounting a camera on the lights, I was like, this is a insane image. But the light stand there was actually lower, so it was easier to access. And so when I was there the year before and I saw that light stand, I immediately started laying the groundwork with the photo marshals. And I said, guys, I'm not doing it this year. I said, but this is something I want to get rolling and get our house in order, because I want to do this next year, and got the blessing of the stewards and Churchill Downs to do it. And so after the Kentucky Oaks race, when everybody has all the remote cameras set, everything at the finish line, they've got a guard that's paid to come out and watch over the cameras, because everybody leaves everything set, because there's so many remote cameras down there, so many outlets, as you know, and there's just no time in the morning for everybody to get all those cameras back on the ground. So you leave them. And so after the Oaks race, I hadn't put that one up yet, and everything else is all in the dirt and everything's ready to go. And I brought an extra large ladder from Indiana, where I was living at the time, and brought it down. And next thing, we trucked that out, and there was nobody out at the finish line. And so we unfold this thing, and I'd telescope it all the way up and climb up there and start putting this camera up. And about that time, a couple of photographers came out and just started freaking out. And you can't be doing that. I was like, as a matter of fact, I can be doing this. Like, well, somebody said, go get the ladder. I was like, no. There's only one going up here, and this is the only one that's got permission to be up here. And I was like, I'm the only one that's doing this. So I put it up there. And then, of course, as in was sometimes in the industry, you have people that'll then start, like, oh, I've got to do that next. And so I wasn't there the following year, and sure enough, people were putting cameras up there. I don't know if there was anything from this past year, but it was fun, just especially for that year and with American Pharoah and my first year running my own crew, to come up with some of my own unique looks, because, I'd been taking notes all these years, what to do, what not to do, what I wanted to do whenever it was my turn. And so I kind of got to put that into practice, and then did that for the New York Times. And then the Belmont rolls around, and, Jeff calls me. He's like, so you want to do the Belmont for us? And then Claire calls me from SI. It's like, so you want to do the Belmont for us? And so it was fun to kind of go back and forth and get the best situation that I could get for me in doing the Belmont, and be able to cover the Triple Crown and at least two of the three legs, the start and the finish, which was just kind of it was the most exhilarating event that I'd covered in my career to that point. And to be able to come away with a picture that not only nobody else had, but nobody else had ever made from the Derby in 141 years, to me, was really special.
It is. And I think it speaks a lot to strategy. Don't reveal your cards until the absolute latest moment, because again, you're right. It creates this frenzy, and all of a sudden the people you reach out to are getting hit up by 70 different people. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, So at that point, to just sort of shut it down and say, no, I have exclusive permission here. That's great. And to create something different. And again, we know, our friends, that we see all year, every year at Derby or these events like Skip Dickstein, Mr. Horse Racing,
right.
Teach us a lot. But this is nice to go beyond that. And you proved yourself, which is why now all of a sudden the phone starts ringing, and you don't have to be the one pitching. They come to you. Lee Trevino always used to say, he knew success was when he didn't have to worry about paying his credit card bills, at the end of every month, the golfer Lee Trevino. Yeah. But to your point, not having to worry about making the call and getting the calls is when I feel like you transition in your career, which is a solid thing. And I'm going to quickly say this, because I know our producer Brian's going to smack me for bringing it up, but this picture saddens me, because I was taken away. I was credentialed for this, race.
Right.
I was credentialed for the Belmont Stakes. This is the last horse prior to Justify that wins a Triple Crown, and we wait decades for that opportunity. But work took me away to a TV commercial in Argentina. Brian, I will shut up now, but In a way, I'm sad, but I did get Justify a couple of years later, which is also unheard of to have, close triple crowns like that. So not an easy thing to do.
Nope.
Baseball celebration, championships, winning. We see champions on the hat. It says World Series champions. Talk a little bit about your work now here in baseball.
World Series champions indeed. 108-year drought coming to an end with Champagne. Up to this point, American Pharoah for me was the most exhilarating and exciting event that I had ever covered. And then fast forward another year, and it's early summer 2016. I was actually on vacation with my family down on the Texas coast. My wife had managed to, try to make life a little more tricky for me. And so we had, our oldest was just a couple years old and our youngest was an infant. And my wife, the night before we left for vacation, decided to break her foot and her ankle, going down the stairs at our house. And we still went on the trip, and she felt like she could get through it. She just ended up hanging out at the beach house. But that's whenever you kind of, get thrown these curveballs. And Tim Rasmussen, the director of photography at ESPN at the time, called me up and asked me, he's like, so what does the rest of your summer and your fall look like? And I was like, actually, it's pretty booked up, but for the right project, it can become flexible. And he paused for a second and he said, I have a feeling the Cubs are going to win the World Series. I want you to spend the rest of the year with the Cubs starting next week. And I was like, yes, I will find a way to make this happen. And the fun thing for me is I grew up in Midland, Texas, and we had, I think, 6 TV channels whenever I was a kid growing up. And most people, whenever they'd get off the bus home from school, they'd go and play video games or do whatever. I usually would have some sort of sports practice in the evening, but I'd get home and I was a project of the WGN effect. I'd come home and the Cubs were always playing a daytime game on WGN. And so I was able to come home and instead of, watching cartoons or whatever else, I'd watch baseball. So I grew up watching the Cubs. And so my teams were the Cubs and the Astros. And so I had to have a Texas team. And when I started liking the Astros, Nolan Ryan was there. So I was like, yeah, this is great. But I always had a fascination with the Cubs, even though it was just like such a faraway place because I'd never been to Chicago. But, it was just something that I was really drawn to and loved the Cubs. And so for me, this was just a really, really fun opportunity because for my wife and I, whenever we met, not long after I moved to Indiana, the first trip we ever took was to Chicago and we went and watched the Astros play the Cubs. So that was really cool. But to get this assignment, it's just kind of once in those, probably a once in a career type thing. You never know. It'd been 108 years since they'd won the World Series. And that week after the call, I started doing games in Chicago. I'd do sometimes 1 or 2 games a week. Sometimes it'd be 5 or 6 games a week. Home stuff, away stuff, feature stuff. But I didn't focus a lot on the action, at least until playoffs. Certainly I would shoot the action, but my intent was to document the personality of the team, the personality of the city, what Wrigleyville was like. And just shoot the scenes that I grew up watching on TV, people waiting for foul balls outside the stadium in the streets, things like that. So I was just fascinated by this project and it was just, an absolute blessing to get. And I think, at the same time though, I think I knocked a home run with this one just because, I put all my heart and my soul into it just because it was such a unique experience. But, we didn't get any special access. And so one of my things was I was going to be the first one there and the last one to leave every single time. So the players would get used to seeing me and become familiar with me. And so one morning, like down in the lower left, the guy with his hat on backwards that's spraying the champagne that's going right at John Lester that just had the toast, that's David Ross, who's the current manager of the team. Mm-hmm. And so I developed a relationship with Rossi because one day he comes out before the start of the game and it's him and his 2 oldest kids and they're playing catch in an empty Wrigley Field. And I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Ross," introduced myself. Told him what I was doing. I said, "Would you like some pictures of you playing catch with your kids?" And he was just floored. He's like, "Would you mind? I don't have anything like that." And I was like, "I've got 2 little ones. I'm on the road a lot. Like, I get it. Like, whenever I'm with them, I'm hands-on." I was like, it would be an honor to do this. Took the pictures for him. Thought about waiting. I was like, normally you want to wait until publication, but, ESPN was going to dedicate an entire issue of the magazine to the Cubs. But I just sent him and his wife some photos that evening. That next morning or before the next game, he came out, thanked me for him, had already sent me an email thanking me for him. But at that point, every single game, he would either come out to the photo well, shake hands with me, or he would look for me in between innings until we made eye contact and tip his hat every single game. And so through that, was able to start developing relationships. I was able to cover him on his last start before Game 5 of the World Series. So his wife, the stomach bug had been going through the house. His wife had it. She was getting, IV treatment, so she'd be able to make it to the game. So I've got pictures of him changing diapers before the last start of his professional career in the World Series. And so I was able to develop relationships with Javier Baez and a couple of these other guys, Aroldis Chapman, now with the Yankees, and be able to get some, behind the scenes access, because when they're away from the stadium, they're private citizens. So just to go on the roller coaster ride and see behind the scenes glimpse of a couple of these athletes, but just kind of document the season as it went on. And then the roller coaster that was Game 7. I mean, everything from the rain delay and just the crazy back and forth game. When Chapman gave up the home run to Raji Davis off the camera in left field, I thought I was going to throw up, because I've got this mound of work.
You do emotionally connect.
Absolutely.
It's a job for you, but you're a fan. You emotionally connect.
Absolutely. And so whenever that ball goes off that camera, I was like, I'm going to throw up just all over my cameras right here. It's this is just terrible. But the Cubs, they were tightly wound at that point. And then we get the rain delay. And
right.
We all go inside and we come back out, and whenever we're walking back out, the players are already in the dugout. The guys are on the field, and so they're marching us by right in front of the dugout. And by the time Ross starts chipping at me, he's like, "Hey, Hancock, come on, let's go. We got a game to play." I was like, "I'm going, bro." But it wasn't until after the game that I looked back. I was like, "Oh my god!" And I realized how they looked. They looked loose. They looked like the Cubs I'd seen all season long. And then they put everything together immediately and win Game 7 of the World Series, which was by far the most exciting game.
Big thrill, I'm sure, to do that celebration. That's awesome. Thank you for that story. Again, behind the scenes always work. And before I move on, I want to go backwards, because we can't go past Tim Rasmussen. I don't want to get deep into it. Another great editor. But you speak about the relationships with the players. Tim was the black team leader at the Eddie Adams workshop you mentioned before. Right. So I'm guessing, I'm going to take a leap here, you had a great relationship with him. And then to be able to work with him professionally after the Eddie Adams workshop has got to be, connected together. So relationships are so important.
Absolutely.
This picture is great, and I'll tell you why after you tell us about it, but not only because it's a great picture. Sure. It's different. It's a different angle. Right. And I had a similar experience in life at the Derby, photographing the reflection into the cup being held up, just the cup, and it ends up becoming a cover. All right. So I'm sorry, I'm patting myself a little bit here, but talk about this and the creative, and we have a few pictures to move on. Our hour's moving quickly. This is great, Andrew. What's happening here?
So 2016 was great with the Cubs, and I got to follow it up with 2017, my other team, the Astros, winning the World Series. And so
all these teams just become your team, or are they really your team?
No,
and by the way, Nolan Ryan was a Met first.
He was a Met, and he was always an Angel too. Mets, Angels, Houston, Rangers.
When I moved to LA, I covered the Angels. I did cover the Mets with Nolan Ryan, but Nolan started with us. Okay, I'm just saying. Go ahead.
Very well aware.
2017 World Series.
Yep. And so this is Carlos Correa, who had been Rookie of the Year in 2016, I guess, 2015. And that's whenever I started a relationship, kind of documenting his career, spent time with him in Puerto Rico training. And so playoffs come around, and one of my old SI editors, Nate Gordon, who's now leading up things on the photo side of things for the Players Tribune, hits me up and he's like, "All right, we got you in Houston for baseball playoffs." I was like, "All right, let's go." Actually, he didn't tell me. I was covering a football game, and I got an email from Major League Baseball saying, "Your credentials are approved for the ALCS and the World Series." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm doing that." And then I hit Nate up. He's like, "Oh yeah, sorry. We'll have you in Houston for these games." And, did a lot of behind the scenes things with Carlos that year. He's always been great about access for me. And, everything from him doing batting cage work with his dad in a public cage before Game 2 of the ALCS, things like that. So I was able to get some access to a point during the parade, even though this image here, I'm actually standing on the street with all the other photographers and the people that are all surrounding these fire engines that are parading the team through downtown, and just kind of kept following things and just kind of constantly looking, and then just started watching that reflection, and then everything just kind of came together, for this image. I've often told people, to be a good photographer, aside from being a great problem solver, you have to be part redneck. You got to notice the shiny things in the background and be easily distracted. And so I'm like, ooh, shiny, and just kind of kept looking at that. I'm like, all right, this is something I want to keep an eye out for. And then it just all kind of came together for this shot. And then Chris David Garcia, who was with the Astros at the time, and kind of running their creative department, hit me up with a really nice message on Instagram after that. And he said, I've looked through thousands of images from this parade. And he said, that takes the cake. He said, there's nothing like that anybody else took. And so for me, that was really cool. And obviously the Players Tribune loved it. They played with it big, and they even had it as a display in their Photoville container in New York that year, which was a lot of fun to see it printed and get some exposure there. And so it was just a really fun moment with a player that I'd had a relationship with, and getting to document that. And then just for everything to kind of come together magically and be able to see, the etching of World Series champions in 2017 on the bottom of the Commissioner's Trophy, for me, was just really, really cool. So
it's beautiful. And again, it speaks to doing it differently than everybody else, because everybody else is probably going wider, not seeing the reflection. And to go tight with those details and have an editor or somebody on the Astros, a team say, hey, wow, I've seen these thousands of pictures. This is unique wins. And,
right.
That Derby, you expect to see the winner of the race crossing a finish line, a tight shot of the winner, jubilation.
Right.
But the editors had the mindset to say, hey, look at that detail, the cup. You can see the trainer, the jockey, and the owner in the cup. And that reflection, to me, is perfect. And it's also telling. We're winding down a bit now, Andrew.
Sure.
I know we talked about multiple exposures and doing things in camera, and your commitment to trying to nail it in camera. Let's talk about a few multiple exposures coming up, and then a project you're working on recently. So take it away with this picture of David Price from the Boston Red Sox.
Absolutely. So this is the next year's baseball playoffs. And so I'm back in Houston. Astros are facing the Red Sox. The only problem is the Astros are in a 3-0 hole. And so at this point, nobody's wanting to give me access for things. And so I'm back there for the Players Tribune, and my goal is I still have to deliver something unique. They were hoping I was going to be able to get some behind-the-scenes access. I struck out with all the Astros guys just because they're trying to avoid elimination. Didn't have any luck getting any traction for access with any of the Boston guys. So I said, all right, well, I've got to come up with something. And I actually was having lunch with Chris from the Astros before this game, and not too far from the stadium. And as I was leaving, I drive past this area. We have all these buildings that are graffitied up. And so I just kind of started thinking for a second. I was in a really good kind of creative mood and started shooting some of the graffiti. And this is with the Z7. So it was right after doing the launch campaign for you guys with that camera, and falling in love with it and its abilities, and was able to use SnapBridge and do in-camera overlays and take action pictures during the game, overlay them with the images I shot earlier that day. And then I was actually sending them straight to my phone from the back of the camera and texting them to Nate in New York, and getting his feedback real time on this stuff. Yes, no, pursue this a lot more. And he's like, I love these. He's like, but make sure you're still shooting the game. And I was like, that's the beauty of this. I'm still shooting the game. I'm not mentioning anything, and then I'm not missing anything. And I'm still able to go through in between innings and put a couple of these together. And so this is actually a pan slow shutter pitching shot of Price. And I put it on one frame, it didn't look good. And then whenever I put it with that particular frame, like everything just kind of lined up with the leading lines and where's the ball fit in the frame and where his face was in the other face. Like it just was like magic and came together. And at that point, especially seeing what I could do from an overlay perspective, because I had done in-camera multiple exposures for a long time. I'd done it since film, but I switched to Nikon in 2010. And one of the reasons why I switched is with the D3, I could do multiple exposures. And so that fall for Sports Illustrated, I was covering baseball playoffs in Cincinnati, and took a 6 or 7 exposure shot of Cole Hamels to the Phillies pitching that the magazine actually held back, because on that year, on paper, the Phillies were supposed to win the World Series. And so they didn't publish it in the magazine that week because they were holding it back for the commemorative issue. And the Phillies didn't win the World Series. And so that image never saw the light of day. But at that point, that's what I loved.
Who won the World Series that year?
I don't even remember. I think maybe the Giants.
Oh, yeah, I was curious. I was hoping it was the Red Sox so we could make fun of our Yankee fan friends.
Right.
But that, again, to see this kind of creative, and just for everybody out there, just to be very clear, you shoot these pictures individually. Image
Right.
overlay is a feature in the camera. You bring it up, two windows appear. You
Right.
pop up your first picture, you pop up your second picture, and you blend them together. And there are some controls in camera, and this is straight from the camera, right?
Yeah, and the thing I love is, there is still an organic process to this that you can't control. In Photoshop, you can move layers and you can put things exactly where you want them. Here, things fall where they fall, and I like that organic nature to it. I like how you have a lack of control on that, and things are going to do what they're going to do. And so whenever you're taking like one picture and then you take the next picture and without advancing the film in your old multiple exposure days, that's that. But the overlay, it's like you've taken two negatives and you sandwich them in the enlarger and you put one right on top of the other, and then you project your image down. Like, it's the same thing. And it's just really invigorating to be able to do this in camera with the tools that Nikon's giving us to do. For me, it's a shot in the arm. Like, I absolutely love it. And to take it from doing what I did during baseball playoffs that year to commercializing it and doing this on assignment for the Dolphins last year, and it was just a lot of fun. So I got in early, spent time with their photographers, and we roamed around Miami. We shot graffiti, we shot buildings, we waited for this sunset over on the port side looking back at downtown. For another game, I got up and they sent me up in a helicopter twice to go get some different images, played around shooting a lot of that game from the catwalk, and just putting things together. And the fun thing is, this is actually really challenging to do. There's a lot of people like, yeah, you can do the technique, but you really have to think about two frames at once. Like, when you make the first frame, you have to have an idea for how you're going to use it the next frame. And you have to have an idea for how the lights and the darks are going to work, how colors are going to work, texture, focus. Like, all these things can work with something or they can compete against something. And so it's a fine balance trying to find where all that comes together. But the Dolphins, they've got an insanely talented roster of creatives there and photographers that I have a lot of respect for. They've got one of the better creative departments in the NFL. And so it was a blessing to get to come work with them. They had actually reached out to me whenever they were coming to Dallas to play the Cowboys last year and asked if I was available. And I was. And they ended up just loving the content I created. And they were like, so we'd like to get you to Miami for some games too. I'm like, let's do it. And so we did it. Right? Yeah, and they wanted me just to really kind of push it. And they'd have 8 or 10 photographers there credentialed for the game. And their photo report is substantial with what they create each game. And I was there with them in the morning before the first game that I shot, and they're going through everybody's duty roster. And of course, I'm not mentioned. And they look over at me and said, "You do what you do." I'm like, I'm happy doing that. So
any photographer loves to hear that.
Exactly.
You doing what you do.
Yeah.
It obviously inspired us for you using the featuring camera. We ended up doing a big billboard with one of the Mets pitchers against the New York City backdrop. So we commissioned you to do that as well. You've done more of that multiple exposure work with us. And it's absolutely just phenomenal. As we close out, I know you and I spoke with our producer, Brian, about this image and what you're doing right now. Let's close it out in talking about what's important about this image and why you selected it.
Yeah, this is important to me because it kind of generates a pivot for 2020. I had met this climber, a world-class climber, pro climber Ben Ruick. He was modeling for a summit workshop that I was teaching, the lighting workshop, a little over a year ago. And he and I just really hit it off, and we had a lot of fun, and we kept always talking about wanting to work together at some point. Obviously, the adventure side of things has been a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, in part just because of where I resided. Indiana and Texas aren't really known a lot for adventure sports. But he and I had stayed in contact, and I had actually had an idea in doing some overlay stuff for a personal project I wanted to do this past June. So whenever we could start traveling again, I was like, all right, I need to get out. And I'd had some assignments here and there, but again, everything was vastly different than it was a year ago. And so I was like, not knowing what sports were going to look like this fall, and I think it's still another year before things start to look normal, I was like, this is a time for me to work on some personal work and, see what happens. And so I went up there, didn't tell my wife that I was going to be climbing. I kind of knew going into it that he was going to get me up there. By far the most physically punishing shoot that I'd ever had, but thanks to being fit and my kind of enjoyment for a little bit of physical torture, I just absolutely loved it and fell in love with it and got all the way up there. And this is from the very first day. And once we'd finished the trip, we did 2 climbing days, and he looks at the picture. He's like, man, he's like, these are insane. He's like, if you want to do this, he's like, you can make some money doing this. He's like, you would be among the top in this industry, like right away. And he's like, and mentions guys that are fellow Nikon ambassadors and stuff like that, that are, you know, among the most highly regarded climbing photographers there. And he's like, you know, you can do this. And I just had a blast with it, and I like the challenge of it, and already looking at this picture and dissecting what I can do differently to do better. So we're going to revisit this this fall. This is a climb known as God Mode that he's, you know, known for and loves. And so we're already coming up with some plans for that, things we can do video wise. But for me, this is going to be a pivot because, you know, access is being limited at stadiums, and just shooting from the 8th row and just getting solid green backgrounds with lights from and white lines on a football field just isn't quite as attractive. And not getting the access, you know, for the behind the scenes stuff, yeah, that's frustrating. So I'm like, all right, where can I go that's going to challenge me? It's going to push me to take my career to another level, because I've always enjoyed all the genres of photography. I came up as a photojournalist where you have to be able to handle any kind of assignment. And so, you know, I like landscape work, I like macro work, but there's certain techniques that I can take from the different genres that I can then apply to something else, and that just kind of keeps me constantly evolving. And it's this kind of cross-pollination of the different industries within photography. And so, yeah, I got up onto the crag on the side of the mountain and fell in love with it, and ended up getting a major catalog cover out of the first shoot, and some love from some of his sponsors. Yeah, and it just kind of, you know, ended up being a nice little pivot. And so I'm going to be spending a good bit of the fall going back and forth between Colorado and Utah and possibly California, and, you know, see where it goes. But it's a fun thing to do. It's challenging physically, creatively, mentally. And so, yeah, that's kind of where things are now. So it's been fun just to kind of, you know, I have no idea what's next on the journey, which is always, you know, equally as exciting. But this is kind of a lot of what's going to be coming up. Obviously, if, you know, games are assigned, I'm going to do what I can to get them. I've got some big horse races coming up as well. But yeah, that's just kind of a little bit. You've seen a little bit of where I've been. I see a little bit of where I'm going. So.
That's awesome. The new chapter or next chapter in Andrew's career. Let me bring you back full screen. This has been awesome. I'm blown away. It's better than I expected. Even knowing where you've come from, to hear some of your backstories that I've never heard before are incredible. I can't thank you enough for sharing the time with us. Certainly the experience, the creative, the people that have inspired you along the way. I mean, some great names were mentioned during this. So I always tell people, Google some of the names. You'll see some amazing stuff like Heinz Klutmeyer and, you know, some of the editors' work. Absolutely. Look up Jimmy Colton. You know,
absolutely. They set the bar. I mean, those guys, they absolutely set the bar. And I just try to do my best to not make a fool of myself, and try to, you know, be able to touch it every once in a while, because, I mean, those guys were pioneers. And but the thing I take away is just, you know, I was always told is, you know, work your butt to try to make your own picture. You know, don't follow what everybody else is doing. Always try to look to find and make your own picture and do something unique. And that's what pushes me. And that's the fun thing on how Nikon's been involved in that process. Everything from whenever I wasn't shooting Nikon, but they were the flagship and are the flagship sponsor for the Eddie Adams workshop. And just, they were there with all the gear, and being able to get, you know, D1s in my hands, or maybe it was D2s at the time, and the fisheye, because I remember at the workshop being in the front of a split wing biplane and being in the first cockpit and hanging out with my Nikon and photographing the pilot that was behind me. And I was just like, you know,
crazy.
It always felt natural in my hand, and it pushes my creativity. And yeah, it's been a fun ride. I can't wait to see what's next. So,
well, we can't wait to see what's next either. Those of you tuning in, thank you so much for giving us your time. Andrew, thank you for putting this collection of images together and sharing these great stories. Great inspiration here for anybody that wants to move forward in sports photography. Yes, things may be a little different, but reach out, ask people, come up with assignments, push the envelope a little bit, try to be somewhere else. A lot of great takeaways from this talk. You can see more great talks in the Creators Hour at NikonUSA.com/The Creators Hour. Check in after this interview, because Andrew will be on an AMA, Ask Me Anything, on the Nikon USA Instagram site. So you get to ask him some questions about sports photography and tips on becoming a sports photographer. We thank you for giving us your time. Again, the intent here with the Creators Hour interviews is to inspire you and educate you. We are happy to be with you. Get out there, shoot some great pictures, make photographs of your friends and kids in sports situations, and share them with us. And we hope everybody out there is safe, for Nikon on my Corrado, and we will see you soon.